What is up, everybody? How you doing? It's Andrew Lewin here, host of the Speak Up for Blue podcast. You are back with another wonderful episode. It's Ocean Talk Friday today. We're going to do it a little bit differently than we normally do. I was really busy this week, and I couldn't get somebody to come on to talk oceans with me this week. So we're going to do something a little different. We're just going to do something with me, and I'm going to talk about coral reef restoration and restoration in general as opposed to conservation and protection. And we are also going to talk about conferences and how there's a new report from a couple of friends of ours, including Samantha Oyster and Ed Hind Ozan and some other co-authors. And we've got some. Oh, actually, and Chris Parsons as well. That it's a great article about why conferences are important, why conferences matter. I think it's an important thing because I love conferences, and I'm going to tell you why in this show. It's going to be great. Before we get to this episode is all about this podcast, this show, this whole program is all about a conversation. And we start the conversation on the podcast, but we bring it to a different level in interaction when we bring it to our Facebook group community. And it's the Speak Up for Blue podcast community Facebook group. It's awesome. It's free to join. All you have to do is go to speakupforblue.com/group. We'll go right to the link, use your Facebook account, request to join, and I let you in whenever I see it. And we've got over 200 members. I think it's 205 last time I checked. It keeps growing at a nice pace, which is great because it allows everybody to have a good say and everybody to speak up for the blue, which is what we want to do in that group. So when you do join, if you're not already part of the group, introduce yourself. Let us know what your favorite species is and why you will join this group. I'd love to know why, specifically, because everybody does it for a different reason. So I'd love to see that you guys are doing that, and I look forward to continuing to see you guys come up with the group, and the people who are already in there continue to bring that value that we love so much, because I have a great time in there. I check it a lot during the day, and it's a lot of fun. So that's it for the updates. Let's get started to this wonderful show. Let's start the show. If you are sick of hearing of the doom and gloom of the ocean and not knowing what to do, you're in the right place. If you want to meet people working to protect the ocean, then you are in the right place. If you want to find out how you can get involved in protecting the ocean, then you are in the right place. This is the Speak Up for Blue podcast, and I am here to empower you to live for a better ocean. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Speak Up for Blue podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, founder of SpeakUpForBlue.com, marine ecologist, and self-proclaimed oceanpreneur. And today is Ocean Talk Friday, and like I said in the pre-intro, we're going to switch it up a little bit. This is not our usual banter between two people or more. Nathan Johnson is actually moving from a different state to a different state, from Texas to Virginia for a new opportunity. We're going to discuss that probably next time he's on the show. And I couldn't get myself organized to bring Lynn on or to bring Ed on or anybody else. I apologize. It's just things have just been so busy. I've been doing videos on YouTube lately, and I've been trying to do that once a day for all of August, and that has been my thing. So if you want to go check those out, go to speakupforblue.com/YouTube, and you can check out our YouTube channel. Now, with the YouTube channel, I've also been posting every other day or 3 times a week the podcast as well that you're listening to right now. It's on YouTube in case people want to listen to it on YouTube for whatever reason. So it looks like people are starting to listen to it as well because I'm starting to see the feedback from there. So that's always great. But I just want to get started the show. Before I do, because we're going to be talking about restoration and corals and salt marshes and all the types of habitats that we can restore. We're also going to talk about conferences, why I love them so much, and why there was a paper in the new Frontiers in Marine Conservation. I believe that's what it was. Frontiers in Marine Science, that just came out, and I think it's great to talk about. So we're going to talk about that. Before we do, I want to talk to you about our Patreon campaign. Our Patreon campaign is designed to help fulfill our mission for Speak Up for Blue. That's the design. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build out programs such as the Citizen Scientist program to help people get into citizen science and become really good citizen scientists. So offer trainings, bring in people that handle programs, do all those kind of things, and interact with them. And as everybody's interacting with each other, people who have more experience in different programs can review each program and say what they want to do and so forth. And I think it's a really great program, and your support for that through Patreon, which is a crowdfunding site, would be really helpful. So if you go to speakupforblue.com/Patreon, Patreon, you can actually you can actually contribute on a monthly basis. And I think if you do that, $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, whatever you want, you can actually help us along by doing that. So that's always great. Speakupforblue.com/Patreon. All right, let's get to the show. It's going to be probably a little quicker one than normal, but we're going to go to Mongabay. Mongabay is, I love this site. I swear to God. Eric Hoffner actually posted this article, or a link to this article in our Speak Up for Blue group. So you'd already seen it if you've been part of if you're in the group, or you've seen the group today. I'm recording this on a Thursday night, so you guys are listening to this the next day probably. And it's by the author Mike Gorecki, who's actually been on the show before when we talked to somebody at Mongabay. Published a story about critically endangered staghorn corals are benefiting from coral gardening in the Caribbean. So what is a staghorn coral? Well, if you've seen anything of a Caribbean or any kind of coral reef, staghorn corals are known as the reef builders of the reefs, of modern day reefs. So it's like a branching coral. So it almost looks like a tree, thicker maybe. Not thicker, but like the branches are thick. They're hard. They're known as a hard coral, a stony coral. They're basically, a lot of them, the picture I'm looking at now on Mongabay, which I'll put the link in the show notes, but the actual horns are the meat of it, I guess the twig of it, or the branch of it, is actually brown and the tips are purple. And a lot of times either they'll be white with blue tips, or a variety of colors, but there'll be like a different color at the tip, which is usually more of a fluorescent or brighter type, and that's where it grows from. These are calcareous corals, so of course all corals are calcareous, but especially these ones really build their skeleton slowly. So they're a very slow-growing coral, but they're used to be found everywhere. About 50, 60 years ago, they were found everywhere. Same with the shelf coral, like the Montipora corals, were found everywhere as well. Now, of course, with climate change, you have sea surface temperature increase, you have ocean acidification, it doesn't allow as much calcium to be taken in by these corals. You're getting less and less staghorn corals and Montipora corals, so people have begun to come up with innovative ways to figure out how we change corals, how we actually restore corals or protect them, right? There's a difference between restoring and protection. We're going to get to that in a minute. But this story essentially goes on of two cases where these corals are being reared, or I guess what happens with a coral, the unique part of a coral, I should tell you before we go into this, is that it can be broken off, and then you can regrow it, either in a tank or in the wild, and it'll regrow to something new, like a new colony. So what researchers have been doing at the University of Miami, if they've been taking these corals, taking fragments of these big colonies and bringing them into a lab, rearing them, and then bringing them back. I think they call it outcropping, but they bring them back into the wild and they restore them. They've been doing it in different parts. They've been doing it in Florida, Puerto Rico. Another study did it Dominican, and all different parts of the Caribbean. I'm trying to see what other places here. I can't see it right off the bat. Where is that? Oh, here we go. Dominican, Florida, Honduras, Jamaica, Puerto Rico. Now, staghorn coral is an IUCN Red List. It's an endangered species. And of course, with the El Nino that we've had for the past 3 years and just the increased temperatures of the past 3 years, staghorn corals have taken a big dip in abundance all around the world, not just in the Great Barrier Reef where we've seen most of the media coverage. It's all around the world. If you've seen anything like Chasing Coral, you know that there's bleaching going on different parts of the world as they focus in. But they never really focused. One thing that what I didn't like about the episode is it didn't focus on how to actually save the corals or how to protect the ocean. And I think restoration is one innovative way to do it. And I think it's important. I think these studies are important to show that, hey, you know what, we can restore, corals, and we can help build them back. The problem is with restoration, one, it's extremely expensive, extremely laborious to do. But it's also, if we don't cure the culprit, what's the point of regenerating what's dying in the first place? I think that's the biggest argument a lot of people would say, is to, if you're going to replant a coral in the wild and then another increase in temperature comes by, or a wave of more acidic ocean water comes in, it's going to be a detriment to the new colonies that you're planting in. So I think, this is one way of helping corals rebuild, but it's also you're not curing the culprit. And this is not a knock on the article. It's not a knock on the researchers that are doing this thing, because you still need to restore. But because of the expense, because of the laborious nature, and because you're not catching the culprit, this is just a temporary fix, right? And when we do fix climate change, and we do reduce the impacts of climate change by reducing emissions in carbon and greenhouse gases, that's when you'll see the fruits of the restoration labor really work well. The other aspect of it as well is protection, right? There's restoration, which you restore something that's been taken away for whatever reason. And then there's also protection, which is cheaper. It's harder to get for some reason, because a lot of people don't really know what they have until it's gone. I think there was a song about that. Janet Jackson, you don't know what you got till it's gone. I can't sing like Janet Jackson, and I won't. I just refuse to do it, okay, people? But but it's a true story. Like, you really don't know what you have until it's gone, and that's why I feel, getting marine protected areas or any kind of protected area in place is a very difficult process. It's a long and drawn out process, but it does work. And the reason why marine protected area works is it takes away the human nature of it all. So if there's a lot of fishing going on in a marine protected area, that could take away a lot of the herbivores like herbivore fish in the area, which herbivorous fish eat algae off of corals. So if a coral's bleaching and then a bunch of algae comes on, like colonizes that coral, it'll be difficult for that coral to recover, right? But if the algae's gone because there's herbivorous fish that are eating the algae and they're grazing on the algae, then that coral has a better chance of recovering. So I'm not saying, there's a huge debate between, whether herbivorous fish are the key, but you want to keep the fish in there. So you don't want them to fish. You don't want fishers to fish out all the important fish for the habitat. So, you put in a marine protected area and you regulate the fisheries big time, right? Or you stop it in certain areas, especially where maybe the habitat is in critical danger of dying, right, because of bleaching of some sort. So what you want to do is you want to remove the human activity, whether it be fishing, whether it be sometimes recreational diving may be detriment. There's a lot of different things. So, and there's also the other aspect which marine protected area doesn't really cover is the water quality, right? If you have a lot of nutrients going into the area of a reef, you're going to get a lot more algae, and you want to reduce that. So you want to get better filtration into tropical waters where there's reefs, especially along the coastline, where in many areas in the Caribbean, let's say, or even anywhere in the world where there's a beautiful hot vacation type area where tourism is a huge deal, you have hotels which have a lot of people that have a lot of waste, and that goes into the reef. And if it's not treated properly, it's going to cause algae outbreaks. And like I said before, if algae grows on these corals, they can't recover as quickly as they could, if at all. So the idea of protection will help corals probably much better than the act of restoration, just because there's less money involved in restoring, in protecting a habitat than restoring. Plus, you don't need as many people. It's not as laborious. So it's just an all-around better thing to do. Restoration is still needed, right? It's still a tool in the toolbox, in the conservation toolbox, as is protection. But protection, in terms of the best bang for your buck, is probably the better way. Maybe the more successful. I don't know if what the success is back and forth, like the success rate of restoration versus protection or conservation. But either way, it's a big tug. I'd love to hear what you guys think on that in terms of restoration and compared to conservation or protection. Let me know in the Facebook group what you guys think. Do you think that we should be restoring? Do you think it's worthwhile restoring? Or do you think we should just put that on the back burner and just focus more on protection? Or do we need to balance both of them? I'd love to hear what you think on this. And it's not just for corals, right? It's for anything, any kind of coastal habitat that's been taken away. Restoration is needed. There's a lot of people there's a lot of engineers and a lot of sort of coastal practitioners, I like to call them, either in conservation or government or engineers or whatever, that deal with the coast. A lot of them are going from what they used to put in is sort of a man-made or human-made barrier that protects the coastline. So it'd be concrete, or it'd be a seawall of some sort to protect the coastline from erosion. But what they didn't realize is that a lot of places where things were eroding, where the coastline was eroding, that sediment would actually transport and build up other places downstream or down current that would protect those places. So there was a rhyme and reason for that erosion to happen. And I think what engineers and coastal practitioners are realizing is that a natural shoreline is a much better shoreline in the long run. One, is aesthetically pleasing, it's cheaper to have, but you can actually figure it out. And I think that what they're doing is they're going by, if you live in an area that's eroding, maybe you shouldn't live there in the first place, and maybe people shouldn't sell you a home in there in the first place. So I think they're realizing that just some places we just can't live because it's part of that natural process, right? The Mississippi Delta is a big example. I was at a Coastal Zone Canada conference last year, actually June 2016, so just a little over a year ago. And one of the big keynote speakers was one of the engineers involved in the Mississippi Delta work at Barrett Associates. And it was a very interesting talk, going from like a lot of things that were seawalls or concrete kind of walls that took away that sediment transport. And a lot of places in the Delta were missing. The act of making it channelized or making it sort of humanized, you just say, and taking away the natural aspect of it, had more of it. It caused more problems in the long run, just because there was no sediment transport and there was no sources of sediment that were going to other places and ruining other places where people lived or what people relied on within the Delta. So now they're going back and they're naturalizing the area, understanding that certain areas will be washed away while other areas will be built up. And I think in that process, they had to move into like an entire village of people to a different place. So it's quite expensive to go back and restore that stuff instead of protecting it in the first place. And I guess it really goes in this case, it really goes towards trends back then when they did this sort of channelization. That was the thing to do. That was the trend in engineering and coastal management. It was let's make sure we armor up the coastline to make sure it doesn't erode, so that we can keep what we want. But we never really understood the full ramifications of it. And now I think we are, and we're going back to a naturalized state, which I think is a lot better, in the long run. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a coastal engineer, so I don't really know sources and sinks of all sediment and places where it's going to erode. But it makes sense from an environmental standpoint anyway. But speaking of conferences, like I said in the Coastal Zone Conference, I want to move to our next story. It's going to be a quick episode. But our next story, it was kind of cool. From friends of mine and friends of the podcast. So Sam Oyster, John Sigliano, Ed Hindozan, and Chris Parsons wrote an article. This was it was released on August 9th, 2017. It's Frontiers in Marine Sciences, Why Conferences Matter, an illustration from the International Marine Conservation Congress. Now, full disclosure, I'm a little biased towards the International Marine Conservation Congress. I've been to 2 of them out of the 4. The first one I didn't really have the money to actually travel, was in Washington, D.C. The second one was in Victoria, B.C. That's the one I went to, my first one. And then there's one in Scotland, which I couldn't afford to go to. And then last year, there was one in Newfoundland, which I went to as well. So I've been to the Canadian ones. And I'm going to the IMCC 5, which is in Malaysia next June in 2018. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm chair of the sponsorship committee. But that's just a full disclosure that I'm a little biased towards this because I'm a part of it. But I have to admit, the reason why I'm involved in this conference is because it was one of my favorite conferences. Now, this is not an ad to tell people to go to the International Marine Conservation Congress, even though I'm telling people you should go to the International Marine Conservation Congress in Malaysia. 1, because it's in Malaysia, but 2, it's the people that make up this conference are amazing. This is one of the only conferences that I've seen where you get a mix of every profession within the marine conservation field. So you get scientists that are from academia, you get consultants, you get independent scientists and conservationists, you get government scientists from various governments around the world, countries around the world. You also get nonprofit organizations that are doing work all around the world and sharing it. And it's just fantastic. And the study here proves, it was a survey done over the 2 IMCCs, I believe it was the 3rd and the 4th International Marine Conservation. And he said there was 100 respondents to this And feedback included that Congress provided useful new information that will aid, and there's I think 4 things that it aided. So it said it aided the person's research, so the person who did the survey, 58% said that. 2, it helped them in their in-field conservation. 3, in conservation communication, and 4, conservation and management policy making. And then it also said they also reported gaining new techniques, skills, and novel ideas to further their research and careers. And they said nearly all gained new contacts that improved their research in the field conservation, science communication, and/or conservation policymaking. 2/3 gained ideas, contacts, and/or lessons that could lead to publications. Over 1/3 gained new ideas, contacts, or lessons that led to grant proposals, and 36% gained contacts that led to funding. So it's just, what I want to tell people is conferences are not just like, I think what happens is when people go through graduate school, conferences is something you do as a student. Your advisor will send you or go with you to a specific conference or many conferences, depending on, what kind of grant you have and how much money you have, and you will present. And it gives you the experience of presenting to an audience that is in your field. So they could provide critical feedback, they could provide questions, and you can network with the people that are in your field or interested in your field. So that when you're a graduate student, you actually make those contacts. So it's good for, a lot of people think it's great for students, but it's also great for sharing information and building up your contact list for more collaboration in the future. And I think that's one of the best parts of the International Marine Conservation Congress. When I went there, I have to admit, I didn't go to, even though the sessions were amazing. Sometimes the first time I went there, the sessions were so amazing, it was difficult to figure out which session I wanted to go to, so which talk I wanted to go to, right? Because you're moving in and out, you're bound to miss some because they're at the same time slot, or miss people you want to see present because they have a great reputation for presenting, and it was very difficult. The second time I went, I took a different approach. I went to a lot of different sessions, but I went to sessions where I didn't really know a lot about the subject, and I didn't really know a lot about the people. Sat in there, asked questions, looked around at who the people were, and then I would, afterwards, the biggest thing I wanted to do at IMCC, International Marine Conservation Congress, was to build my network and to sort of strengthen the relationships I already had in my network. So having this podcast, I had the podcast for over a year at that point when I went to the 4th one last August, which is almost, I guess, about a year, just over a year ago. I went in and I knew some of the people that I already interviewed. And some of the people knew me because they listened to the podcast. So that was great. And then I interviewed people while I was there. So I was networking right, left, and center. And in fact, after every night, I was exhausted. Some nights, I stayed up till 4 or 5 in the morning just talking to people. One night, I stayed up with a colleague that I had just met there, a couple of colleagues. We went out to dinner, went back for drinks, and that colleague had to leave at like 5 in the morning but didn't want to fall asleep. So we stayed up and we chatted and we talked about marine conservation. We talked about everything. They went to Duke University, so we talked about Duke University. We talked about soccer. We talked about everything. We talked about living in Oregon because the person had just moved out to Oregon. And it was just amazing. It's the connection that you make, and then it's easy afterwards to continue that connection, which I did. And I just think it's one of those things that where you have to, like at a conference, you have to get out of your shell. You have to get out of your comfort zone, and you have to network your butt off. And not networking in, I need to get something out of somebody, but network in the fact of, what value can I provide other people? And my big value, the thing that I hold dear, is I have a list of people that I know at the conference and outside the conference that I could introduce people to via email or in person if they're at the conference, and put 2 people together that know what they're doing. That have the same interest in research, and put that together. So I'm known as sort of the guy who brings everybody together. That was the value that I could bring, and that's exactly what I did. And it was really helpful. And other people did it to me as well. Ed Hine, who's been on the show for a while, Ed was the communications chair, and now will be the chair for the entire conference in Malaysia, but was a communications chair in St. John's, Newfoundland. And he was just feeding me people to interview. And it was awesome. I think one day I did about 6 interviews in one day. It was fantastic. And would I been able to get all those people without him? Probably not, because they trusted him with me, and that was how I got the interviews, because I didn't know the people by then, right? It's very difficult to go to somebody and say, hey, do you want to come up in my room and do an interview? It's a little difficult with that. So Ed provided the suite, like the room in his suite. So it was like just a regular room, like a living room. And it was a lot more comfortable, and people were comfortable with me. And and it just made the interview a lot easier in that respect. And that helped just because of networking, right? And it's just, that's what you do. And you build up a reputation at those conferences. You have a lot of fun. You have some drinks, of course. But that was what I did. A lot of times I sat outside of sessions just talking to people and catching up with people. What was an interesting thing is the first thing I remember walking into that hotel where the conference was being held and where I was staying. I remember walking through, and David Schiffman was sitting with a bunch of people there. And these are people that he knew. Some people were from the Miami area or that he speaks to on a regular basis. And David and I, we see each other maybe once every few years at conferences, right? I'd love to see him more. Right now he's in Vancouver, he's on the other side of the country. But we chat a lot and we get to know each other, but we never really see each other face to face. And I remember the one thing that he said, he said, "Oh, hey, Andrew." And he got up from his table that he was talking to people. And he came over to me and had a chat. And he said, "Are you coming back downstairs, as soon as you get settled in?" I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll come back down." And then we got to talk. And I remember him saying to somebody, he's like, "Oh, what are we?" And he's like, "No," he goes, I come to these conferences to talk to people I don't normally talk to." And that's the benefit of going to these conferences. I see Angelo Villagomez, who travels most of the year around the world, and I get to chat with him over Facebook. But whenever we have a chance to meet face to face, we're going to hang out. We're going to talk about business. We're going to talk about other stuff. We hang out. We have a great time. We're actually really good friends now. But we don't really get to see each other a lot, except at a conference or whenever he rolls into town, or if I'm in Washington, then we'll hang out whenever we can, however our flexibility is. So being at these conferences, like networking, is so important. I always tell students this, and you graduates and people new to conservation and want to have a career in it, network, but provide value to those people. Once you provide value to those people, they're going to see you as important, right? So you don't just go up to them and be like, "Oh, hey, I'm looking for a graduate degree in this. Can you give that to me?" No, they're not going to do that. But if you go and you network with them and speak to them, and you have a conversation, whether it's about science or not, most of the time if it's at a conference, it's going to be about science or conservation or something. But a lot of times it could just be something like, how's your room? What's the food like? Do you want to go to a restaurant? Do you want to hang out? And then you develop a relationship of trust. And that's the important thing. And once you have that trust, and once they're able to say, "Oh, I know Andrew, he's really good," meaning he's really good at what he does, or I really like him, I will work with him. And that's what you want. You want people to be like, "Oh yeah, I can get along with them. So I can work with them because I know what their personality is like. I know what they can do. I know what value they can offer me." And I think that's really important. And what other people at the conference will do is they're gonna provide value for you. So eventually it's almost like an exchange, but you're not asking for that exchange. It's just a bunch of people providing value to each other. And I think that's the most important. Like, for instance, Ed providing me all those people to interview was huge for my podcast. And for me to have him on the show and get his research out is good for him, because that's part of his mission in life, is to get the research out, the research that he's doing or that other people are doing to talk about conservation. Communication is very important to him. Science communication is very important to him. So having him on the show, or me working with him as the conference chair, or as the sponsorship chair, and him as the conference chair, he knows that I can provide value to that. And that's what I wanted to project. I wanted to project that I can bring value. So I think the fact that this why conferences matter is in a journal, an international journal like this, I think is fantastic, because I think it really tells people that conferences are important. And the fact that it's an IMCC conference, I'm telling you guys, if you haven't been to one and you're in marine conservation, you have to go to one. Right? And the reason why we're going to Malaysia this year, or next year, sorry, this interval, is because we want to be more inclusive. Because normally it's either in North America, 3 of them have been North America, or Northern Europe. I was in Scotland one year, in Aberdeen. It's difficult for people in the Southeast Asia to one, get over there, right? Either by paying for flights, or even just the logistics of going and leaving their work, their workload, and their research and their lives to go halfway across the world for a week. It's very difficult. So this time we decide, hey, let's go over to Malaysia. Let's go to Southeast Asia. Malaysia, it was just the perfect point for that. And let's bring people from all different parts of Southeast Asia and North America, because the people that have already bought into the brand of IMCC, like myself, will go there at whatever cost it might be, right? And I think it's really important that we understand that that's how it's going to be. And then what we do is you get more of an interaction, a worldwide interaction, and everybody has a say, because everybody, again, is bringing value to each other, either through paper sessions, right, where people in North America, you've heard a lot of the stuff that we've discussed have been U.S. based. But, it's just because I don't know what's going on in Southeast Asia a lot of the times, right? The one thing I know is I know what's going on in Sri Lanka because Asha DeVos is killing it with science communication out there. But other than that, I may not know because I didn't know anybody there. So what I'm hoping to do in this conference is get to know people in Southeast Asia. That's my focus. And introduce them to the North American counterparts and European counterparts that I know, and South American counterparts that I know. And then now we even increase the value, right? We increase the information exchange, potential collaborations in the future. It's exciting. It's so exciting. And that's what conferences are for. And to be honest, that's why conferences matter. That's why they matter to me. I would love to know why they matter to you. Go to the Facebook group. If you're not already part of it, join it. But if you're part of it already, I want you to tell me why conferences matter. I don't care if you're a scientist or a marine conservationist as a career or not. I want you, if you have conferences in your own profession, I want you to tell me if you have the same experience. But if you're not a scientist or marine conservation and would be able to go to a conference like this, what would you do? Obviously you go probably to a lot of paper sessions, I'm guessing, but interacting, would you feel uncomfortable in interacting? Because we've had people locally. I remember going to a conference out in PEI where a local person came out and asked, questions about problems he was having at a cottage he just bought, and the water was green constantly during the spring. So he wanted to know why. He's like, did I just invest in a bad house or a bad cottage, a bad retirement home, or what's going on? So I think it's important to have other people who are not conservationists and scientists to show up to these conferences as well. Obviously, it's expensive, possibly, but I think it's important. So if you're not in the field, love to know what you would expect from a conference like this if you showed up not being in the field and just what to expect. Love to hear from you in the group. Guys, that's it for the show today. Go to Facebook or go to speakupforblue.com/group to get to the Facebook group. If you're not already joined, use your Facebook account, request to join, I'll let you in. I keep it closed because I don't want any spammers in. So I do a little quick check on your profile, make sure you're legitimate, you're an actual person and not a spammer, and then I let you in. That's really the only reason in. When you get in there, introduce yourself and talk about this episode and what about conferences or about restoration versus conservation or protection, and let's have a little chat about it. I think it'd be great. Also, don't forget, if you want to support our mission to build a citizen science program for citizen scientists and help them with resources and introduce them to different programs and support them and provide training, you can go to speakupforblue.com/Patreon, and you can put in a monthly contribution and even have a say on how this program is built up, because I do a lot of posts just for patrons in the conservation, in the group, on Patreon. So it's always great, and you get an email every time I release something. So that's it for the show today. I really appreciate you guys listening. My name is Andrew, and I'm your host. Next week, we'll probably have Nathan back. I know I said Wednesday today we'll have Nathan back, but we'll probably have him back next week. If not, it'll be Lynn or Ed or somebody who is, all of them are interesting and all of them bring value. And we love having them on our show. So stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have a lot of great conversations. We're going to talk about maybe some drones, I think, is on the list for Interview Wednesdays. But until next time, I want you guys to have a great weekend. Have a great Friday, and happy conservation.